and welcome back to another episode of the Romantasy Readers Podcast. I'm Allie, and today I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and Bookstagram bestie, Nicole. But we also have a very special guest today with us, author and Bookstagrammer Liz Shipton. Welcome to the podcast, Liz.
Hi.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, hi. Nice to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you here. We are literally thrilled because we have a lot of listeners who are bookstagrammers, but also indie authors who market and promote their books themselves via social media, on either
Right.
Instagram, TikTok. So I think we're going to have a lot of questions for you around that as well. And I think that some of our listeners are going to really enjoy kind of hearing your perspective on that. So
I just want to say thank you to whichever listener it was that pitched us to Liz, because I just had Liz just drop us a message saying, hey, could I possibly come on your podcast and promote my book? And I was just like the Liz Shipton that does all those really funny reels that I adore. I'm like, are you reaching out to me? I was like, of course you can come on our podcast.
Oh, that's so great. It trips me out when people say that. But yeah, I'm also really excited that someone recommended you guys. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah. Well, to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of your Bookstagram and your writing journey, maybe for people who aren't familiar with you?
Sure. Well, my name is Liz Shipton. I am an indie author. I've been writing for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was a musician and a software engineer. So I was I got a lot of my creativity out through writing lyrics and songs and that kind of thing. But 2.5 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved onto a sailboat, and we started sailing that boat down the west coast of the United States through California into Mexico. We went through Central America. And then at the beginning of this year, we came through the Panama Canal, and we're now in the Caribbean. But around the time that we started sailing, I also started writing, and I had this kind of idea for a story that was going to be based on the sailing adventures that I was having, and I sort of put it all through this weird dystopian filter, and it came out the other side. And I originally intended it to be one book, and so far it's 8 books. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I just kind of kept writing, and yeah, I guess that's about it. Now I'm here
that's about it. Oh, I'm just living a dream. You're basically living a book. And so hang on, were you a sailor before you started this voyage, or
not really. So my boyfriend he taught sailing. We lived together in San Diego. That's where we went to college. And he was going to San Diego State. He ended up getting a job teaching sailing there. And he kind of fell in love with it. He ended up working a couple of summers over in Europe, doing that, and just loved it. And we kind of came up with this plan together. And then I was kind of like, well, sounds fun, I'm kind of down for whatever. And it sounded like a cool adventure. But no, I did not have really any sailing experience when we first started this. I've been very much learning as we go.
Do you feel like you're an expert now, or are you still learning?
I am not an expert by any means. I would say my boyfriend is definitely an expert at this point. I'd say that I'm a capable first mate. And that's definitely my role on the boat. I'm the first mate and, money earner. And that's kind of how we
or you're just the coffee maker. I feel like I'd just be background, just be like, okay, you do that. I'm just going to sit back here and get my tan and
bring you some ice water if you need it. No, but making the money is also very important. And someone
we decided early on that I was a software engineer before we left, and I was able to kind of parlay that into a different form of remote work, where I'm now freelancing as a technical writer. Whereas my boyfriend is an electrician. He's super handy, but he's very much hands-on type of guy, whereas I'm more internet remote stuff. So we kind of figured out early on that he could handle all of the boat stuff,
mechanical
fixing things, mechanical things, exactly, and I'll handle all the monetary financial things because I have a job that allows me to do that. So that's kind of how we divide things up. It was like, I'll keep us floating financially if you can keep us floating, like literally.
Literally floating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Well, it's so interesting. That obviously kind of coincided a little bit with like COVID and remote working, and because it's changed the game so much, hasn't it? Like I work in a job where I work a hybrid kind of environment, so I get to work from home a few days a week and in the office a few days a week. But there's so many jobs now, particularly in IT, where you can work completely remotely, which is so great because I really like the idea of working and living on a holiday. Like I'm just like, can I just have a remote job so I can just like live in Italy for a year? That would be amazing. But my job's still
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've obviously had that flexibility with your role. You've been able to obviously work extremely remotely, still have an income, and then obviously focus on a bit of a side passion and maybe your future career in writing.
Yeah, so it's, I've been over the last year or so, kind of steadily increasing the time that I'm spending on authoring as opposed to freelance work. And, just like slowly, no crazy overnight success or anything, but just kind of slowly putting things in place and trending upwards. And everything so far is going along and going the way I want it to. So, yeah.
And how did you go like transitioning from like sort of your work kind of writing to creative writing? Because I feel like for a lot of us, you have that, maybe you wrote back in the day when you're a teenager or something like that. And obviously you write sort of professionally when you're in a professional role, but then shifting into that kind of creative writing, like did you go and study or did you just wing it? Like what was your sort of experience?
I totally winged it. It's kind of how I do everything. It's just like, yeah, well, here we go. I'm gonna give this a shot and see what happens. So I had done writing as a kid and always loved it. I probably hadn't really written like, fiction or anything like that since probably high school. But I did write a lot of music. I got a degree in music and I did a lot of composition, songwriting, arranging, putting together albums, putting together arrangements of songs and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there's a lot of transferable stuff in that world that you can kind of bring over. And then honestly, I started freelance writing and creative writing around the same time. So I was sort of learning both simultaneously, and learning both kind of on my own, just sort of learning by doing, I guess. And I think interestingly, like the freelance writing, the stuff that I write for the web has really also helped with my fiction writing as well, because it's taught me to get to the point quickly. Like writing for the web is very much like you got to get the information out and you need to keep paragraphs short and you need to keep people engaged and moving through the content. So I think that it's a really good like training ground actually for writing fiction, interestingly enough.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm not bookstagramming and doing a podcast, I pay my bills. I work in HR, and so I'm constantly fascinated with the evolution of work and how things are going to be moving more remote, but maybe they're not so much in the US, and especially like the future of skills, like the idea that you go to college or you get a degree or you do training in a particular skill set is just so like gone from the world because there's so much to just research on the internet and adults learn by doing anyway. And, I'm just constantly thinking about like, how are we really giving people and assessing talent in, the workforce, people who just have that like learning agility, because that's what's going to that's like the future is just people with high learning agility who can learn anything. Super interesting.
I was going to say it's such a different world now because you can just Google so many things. If you've got the motivation to learn something, you can sometimes get better education Googling it and finding someone, on the other side of the world that actually gives, great lectures or information about how to do something rather than going to your local university and learning creative writing, for example. So it's definitely changed it. So it's about that motivation, isn't it? And we've probably all experienced it ourselves now in that, back in the day, if you wanted to be a personality on Instagram or on TV, you had to try and get noticed, and you had to go and study media or try and get yourself out there that way. Now you get an Instagram, you get a TikTok, if you are willing to just go out there and try and create the content, you hopefully try and build yourself a following, which is what a lot of us are doing now. And, we're definitely winging it when it comes to this podcast and Instagram, but,
You're winging it. Yeah.
Yeah, winging it. But when you've got that motivation and drive, it can, you work until it clicks, don't you?
So I started out doing music. I did that for a long time after college. And then I eventually got just tired of being a broke musician. And I was looking around for something that would earn me some more money. And I came across software engineering. And I started out learning to code completely on my own online, just taking classes, Code Academy, Freed Code Camp, all these like online classes. And I learned a ton that way, just completely on my own, completely for free. The tech world in particular is kind of full of people, surprisingly full of people, or at least in my experience, who want you to learn and who want like new people and people from different backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. They want to bring you in and they want you to learn all these things. And if you are that kind of person who can go out and be sort of self-motivated and just learn a thing, then like people in tech definitely want you. And like, that was kind of how I went about learning to code. I ended up going through a coding boot camp, but a lot of it is just self-starting and, being willing to learn anything and Google your way through a lot of things.
Well, and now like I work in HR in tech supporting software engineers. So that's my job. AI, the presence of AI is changing everything. I mean, like it's only starting to, but again, like what really matters is those like soft skills, like grit, ability to chase down a problem, like learning agility, ability to learn something, the details of the language, or, 5-6 years ago when I was doing this, it was like, oh, you really had to make sure you were recruiting people who knew Python or whatever. And now it's like, it doesn't matter because you can run it through something, you can learn anything. We really just care that you are smart enough to figure it out, and that's what matters.
That's really interesting because so I actually haven't been in software for a few years, so it's interesting to hear that. Actually, I'm curious about like kind of how it's changed since I'm just
laughing at how this podcast has now become an IT tech.
Sorry,
all our bookstagrammers that are just like, I came here to talk about books, not about coding. So
I'm so sorry. Yeah, we should definitely
we can move on from that. Yeah,
Python.
But it's good. Yeah, I mean,
interesting. All right, let's jump back into some questions that we had planned. So hang on. So what came first, the books or the Instagram?
The books. I started my Instagram and a TikTok about the time that I realized that I was going to have to like do something to promote these books that I was writing.
Yeah.
And for a long time, they sort of did nothing. I was on TikTok for probably about a year before it really kind of started to take off. And I think same for Instagram.
And did you have that plan? Like, so obviously you do these very funny sort of reels, mimicking kind of writing and romance in particular. Was that how you started, or did you kind of work your way into that as you went along?
Yeah, I definitely worked my way into that. And actually, so I have to give a shout out to Jason Pinter /AL Brody is his name on TikTok, who is actually the originator of this style, I think, is the originator of this style of video. TikTok and Instagram are weird in that I think the more time you spend on the app, the better you get at using it and the better you get at social media. Like social media is sort of a skill like anything else. And I don't think people necessarily really think this, but like you kind of have to practice it in order to get good at it. And you have to see what other people are doing and you have to know what's trending and you sort of have to know what's going on a little bit in order to find a thing that's going to like click and that people are going to respond to. So I think, spending a year on the app and just posting, I was posting a lot of times. It was like upwards of 3 times a day. And you're really just throwing stuff at the wall, right? And waiting to see something stick. And I think, people kind of think that posting 3 times a day is like some kind of magic number that's going to make the algorithm do some magic for you. Really, all I think that you're doing when you're posting 3 times a day is increasing your chances of posting something that sticks,
That gets
and practicing. You're just getting better at making TikToks, which like,
mm-hmm.
if that's not what you want to be getting better at, then, you know, don't do it. But it's, yeah, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I've found the same thing. Like I started my Bookstagram in August last year, and you know you start with nothing. And
Mhm.
I thought I knew what I wanted to be. I was like, oh, I'm going to review books, and I sort of started that. And it was just kind of there's a lot of people that do book reviews. So then I was growing though, and then I was like, you know what? I started giving like reviews and thoughts and theories, and just posting
Yeah.
all the time. And then I kind of got to the point where I was like, you know what? I feel like people would like a back and forth. Like we're reading a big book like Fourth Wing or Sarah J. Maas or something like that. Like they probably want to hear a back and forth. So that was where I started hunting, and I kind of stumbled upon Ali, who was just a little Instagrammer at the time. And I was just like, you know what?
Maybe.
This might work. Like we just tried it, and then we've just continued from there. But I found the same thing as I've gone along. I've just getting to know what people like. I probably post like once a day ish. But yeah, I think the more it's out there, the more chance that something's going to stick, and you start to get an idea of maybe what your audience likes and what they like to see. I know it's the same for you, but I've found myself just being myself. I like to have fun. I like to be silly. I do like to make fun of things. Like to make people laugh. Get overly emotional about extreme things that happen in these books, and people seem to people seem to relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, I was so happy that the videos that took off for me were those videos, because I feel like that's just me being like me to the extreme. Do you know what I mean? And like, yeah. I was really glad that it doesn't feel fake, and it doesn't feel forced, and it's something that makes me laugh. Like if I write a script for a video and I laugh, I'm like, okay, great, this one's gonna do well, because like it made me laugh. Like I'm having a good time doing it.
Exactly.
And like at the end of the day, when I first started on TikTok, I was like, I'm going to do whatever I want, because literally otherwise what's the point? Like there's a lot of people out there kind of saying like, well, you can do this type of post and this type of post and that will make you successful. And it's like, maybe you might be successful or you won't, and you'll be having a miserable time doing it. So you might as well do something that you enjoy.
Yeah. I like how
and that is like an extension of just like who you are. Like to me, again, like if you're gonna post 3 times a day or twice a day or once a day or whatever it is, you want to, it needs to be natural, and you need it to not feel like you're just wrenching the content out of yourself. Like there was a time with my Bookstagram where it was just like, I just felt like I was working so hard to come up with what to post. And when I started just posting theory videos and like the things that were already going on in my head, and I was just,
just yourself,
literally just being myself and like posting the things that I was already thinking about, that's when it really worked. Because not only that did, that people like responded to that genuineness, but I was able to sustain, posting once a day, because it was just like, I was already thinking about this. I might as well record myself talk these thoughts out loud.
Yeah. I think that like the being able to sustain it is really key, because you have to. But once I actually kind of panicked when things kind of started going viral at the end of last year. I was like, oh my God, am I going to be able to keep making these? What if I run out of ideas? Oh no.
How do I keep this momentum?
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, like I haven't run out of ideas yet, and I don't think I will. But yeah, it's so funny how it went so fast from, oh my God, this is amazing, to, oh my God, what am I going to do?
I got to make another one now. Yeah, there's definitely a pressure. Yeah. No one talks about that we're all just hunting for that viral video. And then when you kind of get one, you're like, oh, now I have to make another one, because, I wasn't going to fall into the abyss of, Instagram nothingness. So, but it is amazing how you do keep coming up with ideas. And that's what I love about Bookstagram and this whole romantasy genre, is I feel like there's forever new books coming out, new theories. There's a lot of content. So I feel like you can always go into it. There's plenty to work with there. It's sort of not something that you run out of ideas quickly. There's always new things coming up.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a growing space. I mean, we've talked on this podcast so much about how, 5 years ago, obviously the word romantasy didn't exist, but the concept of like fantasy romance being its own kind of genre was really maybe 5 years ago it was starting, but in the past 5 years you've seen this huge uptick. Publishers are picking these things up. People are loving them. You're getting more and more readers who maybe have never read it, right? Like, it's crazy to me how many people have read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame who had never even heard of Sarah J. Maas.
Right.
And that was their entrance. So I do think there's new people coming into this space all the time, and so there is a lot of room for bookstagrammers to kind of do new things and find new audiences.
I think it's interesting too how Book Talk and Bookstagram, at least from my perspective, what I see, how they have also influenced the growth of that genre.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, so like in my case specifically, I noticed when I started posting these videos early on, I was like, okay, the ones where I'm specifically like leaning toward romantasy, those ones are doing better. And so I started to lean into it more. And then when those videos kind of led to me getting a literary agent, I'm now like, it was never honestly my intention to be a romantasy author, but I feel like I've sort of become one, partly because I'm curating my content a little bit for TikTok and Bookstagram, because like that's where the readers are. And I can kind of see like, okay, well, this is what works, and I don't hate writing it, so I'm just gonna.
There's an
that.
appetite there, so why
it.
not? So hang on, we haven't checked. Are you a fan of Fourth Wing, Sarah J. Maas, all that, or you...
I have mixed feelings. I actually just took down. I had good reviews up for ACOTAR and Fourth Wing that was just like one of my stream of consciousness typing videos, but like in review form. I think, I have sort of like a love-hate relationship with those books. I think that sometimes I get annoyed that like the writing is not super great, but I can also see why they are so popular, and I totally get the hook, and I'm, like everyone else, I'm obsessed with Rhysand and Cassian, and like that's sort of it.
That's it. I mean, I think we all sit here and there are things we love about the books. There are things that sometimes frustrate us. They can sometimes be a little bit hammy, or that you can have mixed feelings. But also that's, I guess, a great way to be a writer, isn't it? Is because you can kind of be, okay, there are elements of this genre that I really like. There's maybe some things I feel could be done differently, and maybe there's an opportunity for me to create something that's a little bit different, that's a little bit like trying to meet that in between that you feel like is maybe still missing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I wanted to go. Oh, sorry. Did you have any last things?
No, go ahead.
I was going to go back into your sailing life before we move on completely into the world of Instagramming and your books. I was curious about where you have sailed so far, and if you have any favorite places that you've been to.
Ooh, that's such a hard question. Well, so we came down from California, sort of south of the Bay Area in California. We went down the coast of California, through Mexico, and through Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, and then, I mean, I did those all out of order, but then through Panama and through the Panama Canal, we're now in the Caribbean. We're on the island of Saint Martin right now, which is, it's like it's half Dutch, half French. I think it's the smallest island in the world that is split with two nationalities. It's beautiful. I think this is maybe one of my favorite spots that we've been so far. It's just, I mean, it's stunning. It's like crystal clear blue waters and these beautiful tall green mountains all around you, and there's like amazing French food on the French side, and like Dutch people singing karaoke on the Dutch side, like it's great.
I think you need to start just like sharing live videos of you just like frolicking around wherever you are.
When I do actually we have an Instagram specifically for our sailing, which I'm happy to send a link to. It's funny because when I first started posting to TikTok and Instagram, I thought that that's what people would be interested in, right? I was like, well, this is cool. It goes along with my books. So I'll post videos about sailing, and I'll tie it all into my books, and and that'll be cool. People will love it. And like, people didn't really respond to it. So it's interesting. Like I definitely put that out there, and I think that people who read the whole series or whatever, or love the books, and then kind of get into the whole thing and join my newsletter and get on the Discord and all that kind of stuff, and they find that out about me, and then they're like, oh, this is a cool added bonus. But I don't use it so much anymore to like promote It's definitely part of my brand. God, I hate that, but I would say like I don't put it forward so much as like this is how I market my books, because it just, I don't know why people
For some
people just
reason, we don't want to see the beautiful Caribbean. We want to see you talk about a 20-year-old girl named Serial who is dating a 500-year-old
exactly
gay male. That's what we want to watch about.
exactly. But I will say, if people do join my mailing list or follow my sailing Instagram, you'll get all that stuff, because I send out pictures and all that stuff is all disseminated through various streams.
So, do you have any interesting sailing stories to share? Any particular interesting moments or experiences that you're willing to share on a podcast?
Totally. Yeah. One that happened recently, probably our like roughest passage ever, was we were in Colombia for like 6 months last year, in Cartagena, and we sailed from Cartagena across the Caribbean Sea to Curacao and then to Puerto Rico. And like sailing in the Caribbean, you're like, oh, it's the Caribbean, it'll be lovely and balmy and it's tropical, and you don't think that the Caribbean is going to be like the most hellish place that you've ever been in your entire life. But like it literally was. It was
Bermuda Triangle.
so awful. It was like 3 days of just the boat slamming into waves. We were all seasick, just sick as dogs, like sick to the point that like you can't move, you can't do anything. It's so debilitating. It's insane. And just, I mean, water coming over the bow, everything was like coming in through the portholes. All of our like couches were soaked. There's like a puddle in the kitchen. Just, I mean, it's just nuts. Fortunately, that was, only one time, and it was like 2 days, 3 days. So, manageable. But I think we all kind of got to the end of that trip and we were like, okay, well, we never want to do that again, because like, that was no fun at all. But it hasn't been like that for the most part. For the most part, it's been pretty spectacular and easy and lovely and amazing. And even like that, that passage, it's an experience, right? Like you look back on it and you go, oh yeah, I did that. Cool.
I survived that, lived to tell the tale.
Yeah. You and your boyfriend, do you have or did you have, when you started, like a set path that you wanted to follow, or do you just kind of like figure out where you're going a little bit at a time as you go?
Yeah, so we did. Originally, our intention actually wasn't to come to the Caribbean at all. We were going to cross the Pacific last year, which would have meant going the complete opposite direction.
Yeah.
But we're sailing with our dog, and we kind of decided that we didn't feel great about taking her on like a 3-week voyage across the Pacific. People take their dogs and it works for them, and that's great, but it just didn't seem like it was going to work for us. So we sort of abandoned our plan and went a completely different direction. And at this point now, we're kind of like winging it. We don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen next and where we're going to go. We were thinking about crossing the Atlantic and going the other way, but again, for our dog, we just don't think it's really going to work. So yeah, I don't know. It's weird because we are kind of at a point at like right around now, actually, where we're sort of going, all right, well, what's next? Like now what? We don't really know.
I feel like you just like pull out a map and you just like, like play one of those games where you just like drop something to see where it lands. You're like, right, we're going there. Like,
see, I do. I'm always like, why don't we do? It's like, I was like, this summer, why don't we go to South America? And Trev's like, well, because the wind is going the wrong way and we can't actually go that way. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, fine. Logistics, I guess.
I'm going to ruin the fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, with your
If
knowledge.
only you had magical powers to control the weather or the wind so that we could go wherever we wanted.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any real life experiences that you bring into your books? Do you bring much of it into your books, or do you just kind of let it just kind of lightly inspire from real life events?
So funny, because yes, I mean, like literally books 1 through 3 of the Thalassic series, which is the dystopian series. It's kind of like the main thing that I've been working on, is the main character is sort of like a very thinly veiled me. It's all there. Like my heart is on my sleeve, and I'm just being like, here's literally everything about me. I hope you guys like it. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I ever really intended to do that, but as I was writing these books, it was all kind of based on sailing, and then I was like, well, if it's all already based on my life, it just ended up being that way. I don't know how it happened, but yeah, I'd say it's very much based on reality for sure.
Yeah. So, Nicole, I'm going to pivot us just a little bit from our plan because we are talking about the books right now.
I was about to
and
do the same.
I feel like we're like going like tangents into them, but like we maybe haven't given readers like an overview if they aren't familiar with the books of like what they are and what to expect. So, tell us about your books, what you haven't already said. What can readers expect? Are there any other comparable series? How do you describe it? You've done a little bit of that lightly, but we'll just kind of explicitly ask that.
Sure. All right. So my main series is the Tholastic series. It's like a dystopian new adult romance. And it's all set in this dystopian near future water world. There's pirates. There's like an evil biotech company that's sort of also the government that controls everything. And the main story focuses on these two characters, which are Bird and Sargo. Bird is like basically this like train wreck of a girl who just doesn't have her shit together at all, is really screwing up and making a lot of bad decisions. And Sargo is like her sort of polar opposite, really long-suffering, level-headed sailing teacher. And she makes this really poor decision that gets them both into trouble with this like underground organization. And then they basically have to flee across this dystopian water world by sailboat. And on the way, they meet pirates and they deal with, crazy seas and weather and all that kind of stuff. And then they end up saving the world like 3 books later. There's actually a spicy version and a no spice version of the whole series.
Oh, cool.
So the new adult version has like spicy content in it. And then the young adult version, the characters are like 2 to 3 years younger. And it's all just like fade to black. There's no actual like on the page anything in there. Yeah, that's kind of like a broad.
Probably because I exclusively like reading the new adult spicy stuff. I'm often not super aware of there being anything else. So I didn't realize that you had a non-spicy version. That's awesome to hear. And cool because like so many people, I see on Bookstagram, people are always like, here's the closed door modifications. If like you don't want that or you want to like let your kid read it, but you want them to like skip certain chapters. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that you did that.
I don't know. So it actually started out as a young adult series. That was how I originally wrote it, was with no spice. In fact, when I started writing, I didn't even really know about spice. And then I like discovered ACOTAR halfway through writing the series, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?
Oh, I can do this."
Could I?
And you're like, "Oh, there's a big
People
following
like
on this.
this.
People
read
like
this.
this stuff called smut." And
So then, like, what happened was I basically, once I had written the first 3 books of the young adult series, I went back and I wrote some like spicy bonus content. And my plan was to just release it to readers through like a subscription platform. And I kind of realized that running a subscription platform is a whole other like thing that would require a lot of time and energy. So instead of doing that, I just like stuck the scenes into the books where they went and just released the spicy version of the series as well. And of course, Book Talk much preferred the spicy series. And so now that's the one that I kind of have ended up like pushing. And that's the one most people know.
and did you add a few sentences like beefing up the main MMC and stuff? Like let's add a few extra muscles to him and like, like really just make sure you're really aiming it at the audience.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's like obviously I've read the one that you sent me which is so good, but yeah, it gave for me the feel of it was young adult, like it had that young sort of feel, which I feel like teenagers and things like that would really be able to get into these books. And I really like the dystopian sort of aspects and then sort of the piratey sort of ness. And I think I saw someone and they were comparing it to Pirates of the Caribbean meets the Hunger Games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is pretty cool.
That's kind of what I'm going for. And it's funny because like I mean, book talk likes spice, but they don't necessarily like dystopian. So it's actually been a little bit challenging to market these books because they're not like really romantasy. They're sort of almost romantasy, but like not quite.
Not quite.
There's
Yeah.
definitely romantasy elements, and I would say that like the way that I wrote them has that sort of young adult, like Fourth Wing ACOTAR has that same sort of like kind of young adult, like new adult, right? Like feel, where there's these like big end of the world feelings, and also it's the end of the world. Like that, I think is like a very young adult kind of vibe that I sort of brought into these books.
Yeah, but they felt
It
like
is interesting to me that, you know, you don't have like I think you're super right. Like there's not a lot of dystopian stuff that's super successful right now and that kind of breaks through the, you know, the noise or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's so weird because like when I was a teenager, that was all I read. That like dystopian young adult is like all I wanted to read.
Right.
I was obsessed with it. It was like anything that was dystopian future world was like my jam. And I feel like that probably is true for a lot of, you know, the people kind of re-entering their reading age with
Yeah.
romantasy. So it is really interesting to me, you know, what that maybe says about
Yeah.
what we like, or I don't know. I don't know why that is, but there's something there to unpack for sure.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that's why I wrote this type of thing, right? Was because I was the same way when I was a teenager. It was like Hunger Games, Divergent, Maze Runner, like all that. And then so when I came back to writing, you know, so many years later, that was what was in my mind of like, I want to write books like that. And it's actually pretty funny because like a lot of the readers that I have gotten to know say the same thing that you do, where they're like, you know, I hear all the time that people don't want to read dystopian right now because like, look at the world. It's sort of dystopian and people want to escape from it. But all of the readers that I've talked to are like, I love dystopian, you know, like I miss this from my teenage years and I'm so happy to be reading it again. So yeah, it's interesting. There's like some kind of disconnect there between the messaging and
what's popular right now, and that we just haven't had a really good recent dystopian sort of series, particularly one that is maybe bringing in the romantic elements. Like if we had a real romance, you know, enemies to lovers sort of romantasy sort of love story mixed in with dystopian, which you kind of had a little bit in Hunger Games, a little bit, you know, and I think that is going to potentially get people interested in the genre again. I think that I think people just, because even dystopian, it still has a fantasy element, you know, whether it's so totally. I think that will always have an interest for anyone that likes reading fiction. And yeah, I think that it's definitely an area that I don't know. I just think keep going at it because I think it's good content. It'll be enjoyed.
And I think that the reality is those books probably already exist, right? Like there are a lot of, you know, I read a lot of indie books. Like it's something that's really important to me. We bring a lot of indie authors onto the podcast. It just has to, we just haven't had one breakthrough, you know, like kind of break to that next level like we did with like a Fourth Wing or something like that. So, but once it breaks through, once something has the chance to kind of cut through and get the larger readership, I think people will be super into it. It's just a matter of getting there.
I'm crossing my fingers that it's me, guys.
yeah, we're crossing your fingers for you. It will be you.
You got some good news recently, didn't you? Like, have you got some information you want to share about your books?
Yeah, so as early at the beginning of this year, I signed with a literary agent, which has meant a couple of things. So the first thing is that I'm actually writing a much more kind of romantasy type book, specifically to be published by a actual publishing company, like a traditional deal. I unfortunately can't tell you guys about it because I'm still not allowed to talk about it because they have like a really strict publishing schedule, and we're not making the official announcement until like July, I think. But that is in the works, and it's going to be like a romantasy / sort of borderline sci-fi type deal. So I'll tell you that much.
Cool.
And then the other thing that this has also led to is that there's going to be audiobooks of the dystopian indie series that are going to be coming out, I think, this fall. So they basically bought books 1 through 4, I think, are coming out. So the original trilogy, Salt, Sand, Soul, and then Pause, which is book 1 of the second trilogy, but book 4 overall. So yeah, super excited. I'm psyched. I love audio. I'm actually like more of an audio first reader. I grew up listening to audiobooks. I mean, I have like humongous sections of like Wind in the Willows and Alice in Wonderland like burned into my memory from listening to the audiobooks over and over and over again as I was going to sleep as a child. And so I've always loved audio, and it's always been something that's like on my radar. I've always wanted to make audiobooks. Readers have asked me for them. So yeah, I'm super, super excited that that's happening.
Yeah. I for the longest time, I didn't listen to audiobooks. I was just really like, I love to read, and I was really into like hard copy reading, which now that I have a Kindle, I'm like, oh, I don't know why I ever thought that you wanted to read something not on your Kindle. But once I really got into them, really as I like became an adult with responsibilities, you know, and I had to like clean my house
Yep.
and do laundry, but also wanted to experience a book. Audiobooks have been a lifesaver for me. It's the only way I can keep up, especially like in the last 6 months or so, really the last 3 months with what I want to read, what we need to read for the podcast. You know, I'm in 2 book clubs, what I want to read because I want to talk about it on my Bookstagram. I mean, it's just without audiobooks, I don't know that I'd be able to get through it all. So I'm super excited to hear that your series is going to be on audiobook.
Yeah.
Who are any like voice actors that people would know about?
Not yet. So it's like super early stages, and we haven't really gotten to that part yet. But
Okay.
I will be happy to come back and talk about it at any time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And maybe then we can talk about your other books that are
Yes, I also would love to
Another-
come back and talk about my trad book, which is coming out next year as well.
So exciting.
Okay. So without giving too many spoilers, because we do try to keep our author interviews mostly spoiler free. What was the hardest scene or scenes to write, and what are like the easiest scenes for you to write?
Ooh, interesting. All right. Hardest scenes to write. I would say the hardest thing for me to write in general is like connecting things. I call it connective tissue, where you're like, you kind of have to establish a thing before you can get to the real meat of a scene, or you have to get people from one place to another, and you kind of want to do it. I struggle to write it because I'm like, I don't want this to be like a procedural. I don't want it to be boring, but I don't know how to make it interesting, or,
How
you
to
know,
get
or
them
I end
from
up like
place A to
skipping
place
through
B.
it. Right, exactly. I'd say that's the hardest thing for me to write. In terms of like hard scenes to write, God, I don't know. I think sometimes dialogue is either really easy or really hard. So like I will sometimes get into a place where I'm like loving the characters talking to each other so much that then they're just bantering, and I realize that like the plot is not moving forward. They're literally it's like a Quentin Tarantino moment where they're just like chatting away.
Oh, I love that though.
Right. I mean, I love it too, and it's like I feel like the dialogue comes so naturally, but then weaving the plot through that dialogue is kind of hard for sure.
Yeah, I could relate to that. Like, not that I'm this official writer or anything, but when I do dabble in it, I'm kind of known to go off on tangents. As if you could guess that, Ali, me go off on tangents is such an unusual thing. But yeah, I'll just like write pages and pages, and then I'll be like, okay, I achieved nothing in this. It was literally just them talking back and forth about absolutely nothing. But I love it. And then yeah, so I can very much relate to that and imagine that would be a challenge to have to work through. What are some of the easiest scenes for you to write? What do you find is really easy?
You know what's funny? And I never thought this would be the case, but like actually, I'd say argument scenes are pretty easy for me to write. Like, so the 2 main characters in my series, they argue a lot. It's technically a friends to lovers, but it's more like enemies to lovers because they are literally always fighting. And I don't know why, but I find that very easy to write because it's fun to just see their 2 opposite personalities kind of clash, and to explore like how their opposite personalities navigate each other and how each of them is kind of changed by the other's opposite personality. So I really love those. I love those scenes where there's tension and 2 characters are like hashing something out and not agreeing on something or fighting or arguing or whatever it is. Those are probably my favorite scenes to write.
Creates a lot of like sort of almost electricity between them, doesn't it? Like when you've got those 2 opposing sides and there's that friction, but it also creates chemistry. And I think as readers, we love to read that. It's why we have such a passion for enemies to lovers. So I can imagine how, but I guess it would be finding those 2 characters, having them well fleshed out so that they can have that real banter. But It sounds
Right.
very
And
exciting.
what's so frustrating is that, like, so I just finished book 5 of the series, and at this point, 5 books in, like, I know these characters really, really well, and at this point, it's like so easy to write for them that I'm like, God, I wish they were this fleshed out, and I wish I knew this about them in the beginning. Like, when I had started writing book 1, it would have been great to know all of this stuff about these people, but there's no way you can know it until you've written 5 books about them.
100%.
Yeah.
One of my favorite authors, Samantha Shannon, who writes the Bone season series. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's she literally wrote the first book when she was like 16 or 17 and published it. Like and then on the 10-year anniversary of the first book, her publisher let her go back and like redo it. And they re-released it, and like, you know, people sold it, and there are these beautiful copies, and now there's 4 books in the series, and now the publisher is letting her redo all 4 before she publishes book 5.
Oh, wow.
And so this is the author who wrote like The Priory of the Orange Tree. This is just like a lesser known series of hers. And when I read her 10th anniversary edition, it's not that anything changed. It's that it's clear that she knows her character so much more. Like there's better dialogue. They have such more depth. So it's really cool to see when, you know, like that's, I'm sure publishers hardly ever would agree to do something like that. But it's super cool.
Yeah. I actually went back recently and I re-edited books 1 through 3, but book 1 ended up being the biggest change because that was literally the first book I had ever written, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. So by the time I had finished, like by the time I had finished book 5, and then I went back and I reread some of book 1, and I was like, oh God, this is just awful. Like, I can't have this out in the world. So I just went and I did like a humongous re-edit of book 1 to kind of, just to bring it up to sort of the same level, because now, exactly, like, I know those characters better. My writing has gotten better. The world has gotten more definite. Like, yeah, it's all better.
And is that the version that's now like available through like KU, like Kindle Unlimited and things like that? Is that edited version? That's cool. That's the beauty of like being, you know, ebooks, you know, like being so popular. Like you can just update the file, and that's what's there for everyone.
And I mean, sorry, not to bring it back to software engineering again, but like, I think that coming from that world of software engineering where there's an emphasis on like the minimum viable product. And I think I very much like subscribe to that methodology with my writing as well, where I was like, that was kind of why I went indie, was basically because I was like, I just want to get something out there. I want to get it into the hands of readers. I want to see if what I'm doing resonates with anyone. I want to see if anyone even likes it. And now, having done that, I can go back and I can iterate on the thing and I can make it better and improve it. And I feel like that's a very like tech mentality to kind of bring to it. And that's why I love ebooks as well, because it lets you do that.
Yeah. And it's a business mentality, right? Like, and at the end of the day, like writing books, being an author is still a business. And, you know, the goal is to make money, and to do that with as little sort of like extra effort on your part outside of the writing. And so like there's nothing wrong with being business minded in, you know, being an author.
Yeah, and
I'm trying, doing my best.
Well, the other thing is the way that people are today. People want constant content. They want, this is what we get on Instagram and everything as well. People want to be constantly entertained. We've often said a lot of us are frustrated now that we have to wait a year or two sometimes for our big authors to release us the next book, when we almost want them to give us a few chapters every few months. Like, we're just almost just like, can you just give us a constant stream so that we never feel like we're without something to read? So I don't know, I think if you asked a lot of people, they'd probably say, I'd rather probably you give us more, and maybe it, I mean, obviously people, ideally you have the quality there, but the fact that you're kind of trialing and learning as you go and just constantly getting out content, I don't know, just that's the way the world is now. I think it's a lot of the way people want things to come to them. So
yeah.
And like, I would pay $5.99 every couple of months to get a third of an SJM book. You know what I mean? Or, well, she'd probably charge more than $5.99, right? But I'm just saying, like I would pay probably more for the book overall as a consumer to get it faster and in smaller chunks than I because I just want it, right? I don't want to wait 2-3 years to get something. It's like, I'm a huge Swiftie. We talk about Taylor Swift all the time on this podcast just because I'm a Swiftie, but it is like the Taylor Swift approach. Not that like she's the only person that's done this, but he is right now the world's most kind of successful person in this always on content kind of Easter egg environment. And I would be so happy if authors started to do that. So if you want to take that idea,
really interesting. It's actually interesting to say that because so at the beginning of this year, I started a new series where it's basically a short story every month, and I'm publishing them all to KU, but I'm also offering them for free through my mailing list. So that was partly a way for me to just practice writing, because I think short story writing is really interesting. Like, I really enjoy it. It forces you to get real efficient with your storytelling. Like, can you tell a whole story and build a full world and have two real interesting characters like within 70 pages? It's a really good practice as a writer, and it's also great because my readers get something every month from me, and that keeps them engaged. It's like, okay, well, my next book's not coming out until 2025, but here you go. In the meantime,
here's something in the meantime. Keep you going.
That totally. I think that's great, and maybe eventually you can charge for it, right?
Right. And then so I'm also it's so funny that we're talking about this, because I today was working on setting up a Patreon, which I'm planning to release or to launch in the next couple months, where I want to do exactly that. Basically, my next indie book that's going to be coming out in January, release a chapter, a working in progress chapter every week, every other week, as and when I have them, basically to give them out that way. So yeah, that's definitely something.
If you have an audience like we are for Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, and that, people will froth for it. We would be like, yes, give us the draft. We want to read it. We just want to we don't even care if it doesn't end up being the final product, just to get something, to get an idea of your brain and where you're going at with these characters, particularly if you're very invested. As I say, the real fans just adore that kind of thing. But anyway, I wanted to go back to and change the subject to, in your books, do you have a favorite character?
Yes. Oh man. So I'm so in love with the main male MC of my series, who is Sargo Paz. He's this second generation immigrant who starts out the series as this sort of very straight laced, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit repressed kind of guy. And then the whole series actually is sort of ending up being more about him than it is about the female main character, because I just fell so in love with him. And my goal in life right now is to get everyone in the world to fall as in love with him as I have, because I just think he's the best.
That's a good goal.
Well, normally if you've fallen in love with them, there's a high chance that other people will as well. So
I hope so. I also do love, I think, did I send you guys the link to Savage? Because I think that's the one I sent you guys. But yeah, he's another MC in the series, and I like him too. He's great. He's a little more of a scoundrel type.
Yeah, rascal. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you go, Allie.
Sorry. We've kind of touched on this a little bit. But what kinds of books do you read when you aren't reading? / is there anything that you're currently reading?
Yeah, well, so I don't actually read a lot of romance or fantasy, right? At least right now. Most recently, so I'm actually right now reading Killers of the Flower Moon, which is not at all romance or fantasy, but very interesting. Prior to that, I just read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, partially because I was I'm a dystopian author and I'm writing post-apocalyptic fiction, and I've never read the definitive post-apocalyptic book. And so that was tough. It's a super harrowing read, but it's really good.
I've watched the movie. I haven't read the book, but that movie was one of the most depressing, challenging movies to watch. I think it's like one of those movies that sits with you and you just have this complete feeling of the end of the world, the end of the world, not just your Walking Dead kind of ending where you can still potentially build a good life if you can just find a nice little safe island to live on or something. No, this is there is nothing left alive. A little fly is a hint at hope. It was just oh, this is challenging. But
yeah, I actually haven't seen the movie, but it's on my watch list because the book was great.
You got to be in a certain kind of mood for it.
Yeah. And then prior to that, I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. He's one of my favorite authors of all time. I just think his books are just heartbreaking. Every one of his that I've read, it just takes your heart and just shatters it into thousands of tiny little pieces, and it's just, but you love every moment of it.
Mm-hmm.
So as a writer, or maybe as a reader, do you have like a favorite kind of trope, or a favorite and a least favorite trope that you like?
I love a one bed. It is just my absolute favorite. I just like,
Oh,
I don't know what it is about that, but man, I like to write them. I like to read them. Anywhere that I can sneak in a one bed, I'm gonna do it.
I love it. I am the same. I like it's one of my favorites. Maybe my favorite of all time. It's probably tied with a hot spring, which isn't really a trope that people talk about as being a trope, but in my heart it is a trope, and anytime there's a hot spring scene, I'm like,
Yeah.
you
Oh
know,
no,
'cause
there's
they
a
have
hot
to
You
get
know what
spring.
is
We
naked.
have
so
to get
funny?
naked.
Yeah.
I don't think that I had heard of that before, but I'm realizing as you said it that I've totally written one.
Yeah, no, I know, like, I don't know why, like, the Booksta community hasn't talked much about it being a trope, but I consider it a trope, and they're in a lot of books,
Mm-hmm.
and I love it. So it's like One Bed and Hot Spring are tied together for me.
Yeah.
I love One Bed for sure. What about any least favorite tropes?
Okay, so this is gonna be slightly controversial. Wait, actually, so I would say I don't love enemies to lovers all the time, but I think my mind is changing on that because as I've been writing, I'm realizing what it is that I do like about it, which is that it's a really good way to create tension between characters. And if you don't have that, it's actually really difficult to move the romance forward or have really any kind of like spark between the characters. So I get why people like it. But I actually think that friends to lovers is a more interesting trope because like who can hurt you more than a friend, honestly? Like at the end of the day, to me, two people who've like never really met each other, who are only enemies because of some like ancient feud between their families, that does not really do it for me. I don't feel the tension there as much as I do between two people who know each other really well, have hung out together for a long time. Maybe one of them is like sort of secretly in love with the other, but they know how to hurt each other because they are so familiar with each other. Like that to me, I think is kind of a more interesting trope than the sort of standard like enemies to lovers.
Well, and it sounds like if you take that and you kind of have where they betray them in some way or something, you almost then have that friends to lovers turn into enemies to lovers, but in that way where they've already had this relationship built and then that gets smashed to smithereens and then they have to build that back up again, which is, as you say, is much more challenging because once that trust is gone, having to build that back would be a lot more challenging than, oh, our families have just feuded for, 500 years and we never liked each other. So it's, yeah, and it's also maybe more realistic for like real life in that, most of us don't just have those traditional
enemies.
Yeah.
Like mortal enemies. Yeah.
I have enemies. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I don't know about them, but they're probably out there.
All right.
So, okay, so you have any though that you really don't like other than enemies to lovers?
Tropes
or you
that
kind
I
of
really don't like?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I think I can see the value of a trope anywhere. Like I'm down to read anything as long as it's done well. I think what bugs me more than like specific tropes or whatever is like just tropes done what's the word I'm looking for? Tropes like not subverted, or tropes just done like so by the book, or writing that's sort of just really kind of blah. That stuff bothers me a lot more than like any particular trope does.
Yeah, the quality of the writing really being the important thing, 100%. So, priority question, spice scenes. What can readers expect from your intimate scenes? How spicy do you like to write your books?
I would say, sorry, can you guys hear the wind?
I can hear it in the background.
Really
It's just that
It's
Caribbean breeze.
I can hear it. Yeah.
It's blowing really hard out there.
Rocking.
I'm so sorry. All right. So I usually say that my like chili peppers or like my Richter scale is around like a 3 to 4 out of 5. I'd say like at the beginning of the dystopian series, when I was first still learning how to write spice, it was definitely a lot less spicy. And then that series gets spicier as it goes along. So like book 1, you're at like probably a 3. And then by book 5, we're more in like 4. maybe inching into 5 territory.
Mm.
I
When you
definitely
say 5, are we talking like Jennifer Armentrout 5? Are we talking like
I
what
guess
are
I
you
think
mean by
more of
5?
like I would say books 1 and 2 are sort of like a Court of Mist and Fury type spice.
Okay,
And then we're
that's
getting
helpful. Yeah.
kind of like more towards like a Court of Silver Flames like spice by like
Mhm.
book 5.
I
Five or
always
five.
I always
Okay.
like to like, because we've realized that there's not just like the amount of spice, there's also like different genres in the spice. Like you could almost compare them sometimes to like a cocktail beverage. Like some are quite like some are more like a dirty martini, or some are like, it's like some are just like, oh, like they go on different genres. So would you say they're like a bit of a genre of the spice as well people can especially? Would you say that it's a little bit more in that sort of Sarah J Maas kind of realm of
I would say it's more in the Sarah J Maas kind of realm of like euphemisms, nothing like super dirty or anything like that. My short story series is kind of more where I'm like exploring like pushing things a little bit more, and sort of like I just released one called Puck Bunny that is like definitely the most sort of bonkers, like off the wall in terms of the spice, where I was like, I don't even know if I want to put this out there. This is like kind of bananas.
Yeah, I saw that and I went, kind of want to read that. Sounds interesting.
So yeah, some of the short story series is where I'm kind of like experimenting with like, how far do I want to take things? The whole series is like a lot of different genres, a lot of different kinds of spice. So there's like monsters, there's shapeshifters, there's aliens, there's just all kinds of things. And I'm just sort of me being like, what do we like to write? How does this work? Let's do it all and see how it all feels. Whereas the other series and probably the trad books that I'm doing are a little more like middle of the road, kind of like Sarah J Maas Fourth Wing sort of like area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on your kind of your first original series, what are the current plans? Like, do you have a number of books in mind that you know it will be? It sounds like you've written book 5, but it's not published. Like, what can readers expect from that series?
Yeah, so book 5 is published. It came out at the beginning of March.
Okay.
So then there is one more book, which is book 6 in the main series. That's coming out January 2025. And then there is another book in that series, which is it's the follow-up to Savage, which is one of the prequels. So, and then at that point, I'm going to probably step away from that series for a little while, and it'll be 9 books total, and they'll all be out by like early next year, basically. Right now you can read books 1 through 3, which is a complete trilogy, and then it continues on into book 4 and 5, and then there's 2 prequels, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of the whole plan for that series. I have other plans, like I want to do spin-offs and things like that with some of the side characters, but I need to probably like step away and take a break from it for a little bit before I dive into all that.
And with this romantasy book that you're writing that you can't really talk about yet, can you say if there's going to be, is that going to be part of a series or is it a standalone? Are you allowed to say anything about that yet?
Yeah, so at the moment, in my mind, it's going to be 2 books. But then I thought that the dystopian series was only going to be 3 books, and then it turned into 9. So I can't say for sure. Right now, I'm pretty sure it's going to be 2 books.
Okay.
I
love duology. I really do.
Yeah.
I love like a nice tight like 2 books.
Yeah.
You can move on with your life, like
yeah, exactly.
It's good. I like
and I
like a good
have,
duology.
I have good titles for both of those books, and then I can't quite think of a title that's as good for book 3. So that's kind of an indication to me that like that 2 books.
Gotta wrap it all up in 2.
Call it there.
Unless something comes to you.
Unless I wake up in the middle of the night, like I've got it. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Well, I'm so excited to like talk about these books. I can't wait to hear what that book is going to be. And yeah, it's been so great. So have we got any final questions to ask before we move on to maybe a bit of a game time? Ali, have you got any final questions?
Well, so I was just going to, number 1, I think this is important, but you've done this a little bit, but please gush to us about your dog. Tell us a little bit about your cute pup.
My dog, she's like lying on the floor. I wonder if I could get her to come up here. Hey, do you want to come up here? No, she does not. She's giving me the like I'm sleeping.
I'm not doing this. Yeah.
Her name is Aloy. I rescued her from a rescue in California before we left in San Martin, California. She's like 6-ish now. And when she came to us, she was a complete nightmare. She was kind of aggro and had a lot of like reactivity and fear that we had to work through. And we had to do a lot of training with her and a lot of love and positive reinforcement and all that stuff. But she's doing much better now. And yeah, she's the basis for the main dog in the series, the Thalassic series. So if anyone reads the books and you want to visualize the dog, you can take a look at my Instagram and find a picture of her, and that's like pretty much it.
I love that she's like the priority. It's like, okay, you get to be a main character in my book, like obviously.
Yeah. I mean, dogs, I like in the trad book I'm writing as well. Animals are there's always going to be animals in like all of my books. It's just like non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Are you mainly a dog lover, or do you also love other pets, cats and other pets, or are you really just a dog lover?
Well, yeah, I'm a pet agnostic. I love all animals, all pets. I have had cats in the past and absolutely love them. I always wanted a dog growing up and never could have one. So now that I have one, I'm like obsessed with her. But yeah, I would love to have more. But Trev, my partner, has said no more animals on the boat. So that's which is reasonable, I guess.
I guess.
Noah's Ark with like 2 of every animal just traveling around.
Yeah, exactly. If I had my way, that'd be how it would be.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. All right. Well, we get on to our little game segment.
Yeah, let's do our little game segment. Do you want to introduce it, Nicole?
Okay, so for everyone, we're trying something new, and this is either going to work or it's going to not work at all. But knowing that Liz does these awesome little video reels where she kind of makes these like stories about romantasy style characters, we thought, well, let's try and make a story. Let's try and, make it together. So have you played that game where everyone adds a sentence? So you start with a sentence and then we each have to go around and add a sentence to the story, but kind of you have to keep on track with kind of where the story's at and try and just build the story like that. So we thought we would have a go at trying to do this. Are you up for the challenge, Liz?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
So we'll go Nicole, Liz, Allie, and that'll be kind of our order of going around the circle since we have an online metaphorical circle here. Okay. Normally when I've done this, I've been, you're in a space and you like know exactly when you're next.
All right, here we go. Once upon a time, there was a 20-year-old girl named Serial.
Oh, man. She lived in the woods. She lived at the edge of the woods, and she had 2 dogs and a horse and a goat and like 12 sisters.
Wow. One day, a dark and mysterious man came into her homestead and said to her, I'm passing it to you, Nicole.
Hey, Serial. I'm the son of your mortal enemy, and I'm here to kill you.
Serial was like, hold on. First of all, how old are you? Because I only date guys that are like over 1,000. So I'm going to need you to be at least 1,000 years old before I can enter into any sort of agreement with you at all.
The man said, I'm 998 years old.
Ooh, so close.
Yeah, Serial said, that's not going to work for me. And he said, well, bad luck. I'm just going to steal you anyway. So you're going to jump on my horse and we're going to go on a major journey together.
Serial was like, okay, fine. I'll get on your horse. She jumped on the horse and they galloped across the land until they came to a river. And the river was extremely high that day. And they stood on the edge of the bank and the guy said,
we're going to have to cross. You will probably need to hold my hand so that you don't fall.
He also said the only way we could do this safely is to get naked because otherwise we'll die of cold. So can you please strip now and get ready to cross this treacherous stream together and also jump on my back?
So Serial took off all her clothes and she climbed up onto his shoulders and held him piggyback style and noticed as she did that he smelled really, really good. Like his hair just smelled amazing. She couldn't place the scent. It was like something kind of spicy, like baking maybe. She thought maybe it could be like cinnamon. She wasn't really sure.
The smell wafted over her, and as it did, she thought to herself, why am I so attracted to this man that I just met? I really shouldn't be. What am I doing? Why did I follow this man? Why did I leave with him from my home and my 12 sisters?
Suddenly, when they're halfway over the stream, she feels something bite her leg and she goes, oh my gosh, and she sees blood rushing through the water and she says, oh my gosh.
So, he doesn't have a name yet, does he? Let's call
No, he
him.
doesn't.
Let's call him Reginald. So Reginald. Oh God, what did he do? He picked her up with one hand and held her up out of the water over his head, and then with his other hand, he pulled out his sword and he stabbed it down into the water, and then he threw that up out of the water over his head as well. And on the end of it was this massive snake, and he said, "Behold, I have killed the snake for you."
They made it across the water, and as Reginald was setting up the tent, Serial realized there was only one tent and only one sleeping bag.
Serial told herself that he was too young for her, being 998 years old. So she was going to ignore his cinnamon scent and the fact that there was only one bed, and she was going to sleep instead on the rocks beside the tent so as not to be tempted by Reginald. However, it did get extremely cold that night and she found herself shivering outside the tent.
And then, as if he sensed her distress from inside the tent, Reginald appeared, still stark naked, because I don't even know if they brought their clothes across with them. And he lifted her in his arms off the rock and said, come with me into the tent. And she said, no, you're too young for me. And he said, oh God, something really suave and debonair, and then carried her into the tent and laid her down on a conveniently suddenly present bed of furs and faded to black.
I was going to say, and just as the reader thought something was going to happen, Reginald said, I will not pressure you and I will sleep outside because I know you're uncomfortable with this.
That's
you
good.
Keep the bed. I'll sleep out here. And their story ended, and you needed to wait for book 2 to find out what will happen with this tension between the two of them.
I feel like people are going to listen to this podcast and they're going to be leaving you guys comments like, I'm fully invested now. I need to know what happens.
I want to know what happens to Serial and Reginald.
People leave comments like that on my videos all the time. People are like, but then what happened? I need to know. I'm so invested. I'm like, guys, it's a joke. No, people want those stories.
That's literally like as simple as that. Like literally there's like just a few little pieces you have to meet, and once you meet them, it's like, yep, we're here. We
got a one bed. That's all we really needed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for coming on the podcast. This has been such a fun conversation, from software engineering and the future of work to Serial and Reginald to your books and your upcoming Patreon. We've had a lot of things to discuss. We've really enjoyed it. How can people find you? What should they know? Any upcoming things that you want listeners to know about?
Sure. You can find everything at my website, which is lizshipton.com. You can find the spicy version of the Tholastic series in KU, and you can find the no spice young adult version at my online bookshop, which is on my website. If people do want to check out any of the books, I'm having a sale at the beginning of May in my online bookshop to coincide with my birthday, because it's my birthday that month. Yay. And and also I should say that if you want to join my mailing list, I'm doing this thing called Secret Book Club, where basically if you join my mailing list, you will get one free spicy short story, which are all speculative, kind of romancy, some are a little sci-fi, every month for the rest of this year. And you can find that at lizshipton.com/secretbookclub.
Awesome. And your Bookstagram?
Is Liz Shipton, and TikTok is also Liz Shipton.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. I definitely think we're going to have you on again when you can talk more about your future series
Yay!
and some of the things that you're doing with your Patreon. So we've really enjoyed this. I hope the wind dies down, and I hope that you have you figure out kind of where you're going to go next.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about the wind, you guys.
No.
Bearing
It
with
was
me.
fine.
Side effects of
Thanks so
being on
much
the
for having me.
Caribbean.
This was really fun.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe to help other listeners follow us. You can also email us at romantasyreaders@gmail.com. And you can follow Nicole and I on our Bookstagrams, Book Loveaholic, and Alley Cats and Books. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.